Excellencies, the ambassadors and high commissioners, honorable ministers and deputy ministers that are here today, His Excellency, the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, the DSG, the Deputy Secretary General of ITU, Mr. Zhao, Minister from Botswana, Minister Molefe. I came here in front of you to come and introduce a very important leader of our country in the history of South Africa. He has been part of the leadership of South Africa who fought for the freedom and the liberation of this country. He was at some point arrested and incarcerated on Robben Island for 10 years. And he came back, he continued where he left off, and joined the National Unions of Mine Workers. He worked with the workers. He understands the challenges of this country, of the people of this country. He understands where everybody comes from. He actually is where he is, not because of a mistake, but because he worked very hard, and the people of South Africa acknowledged the fact that he understands them better, and therefore they wanted him where he is. Your Excellencies, honorable ministers and deputy ministers, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to request His Excellency, the Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe, Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa. Deputy President.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Dinapule, Program Director Stella Tembisandaweni, Deputy Minister of Communications, Honorable Ministers and Deputy Ministers here present, the Deputy Secretary General of International Telecommunications Union, Mr. Hulin Zhao, Secretary General of Africa Telecommunications Union, the Secretary General of Pan-African Postal Union, members of the Western Cape Executive Council, members of delegation from participating African states, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives from various parliaments, leaders and partners from the ICT sector, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to welcome you to this ICT Indaba, which draws together governments, leaders, and business representation from information, communication, and technology sector from various states across Africa. It is indeed humbling to have you on our shores, and I trust that you have found our country and people warm and welcoming. As I'm sure you have experienced since your arrival, our country boasts a rich tapestry of various cultures, art, heritage, adventure, wildlife, among others. Should you have the opportunity on the sidelines of this conference to sample some of these offerings, we invite you to indulge in these and to enrich the unique and holistic experience of a nation united in its diversity and alive with lots of possibilities. Program Director, I wish to begin by expressing our appreciation for the opportunity to address this all-important event, the official opening of the Indaba this afternoon. I am personally encouraged by the overwhelming interest that this inaugural ICT Indaba has stimulated, as shown by the presence of experts and leaders of the sector, both in government and business from around the world. Information and communications technologies presents an opportunity for Africa to expedite its growth and development. For the record, through the Africa Connect goals adopted by the African Union heads of state and government, we have committed ourselves to be in the forefront of information revolution. In 2011, only 5.7% of the population of Africa had access to internet. In global comparison, while Africa accounts for 14% of the world population, only 3.6% of internet subscribers are Africans. The above statistics should be a cause for concern for us as the leaders of Africa. Surely we can do more to improve access to ICT by ensuring more connectivity to local schools, libraries, science and centers, health centers in both urban and rural areas. In this regard, as we should increase our efforts to achieve the goals of the World Summit on Information Society of 2005, which committed the world to the adoption of ICTs for the development of our nations. The hosting of this ICT Indaba on the African continent is a valuable platform upon which African countries and other developing nations can accelerate socio-economic development through ICTs as critical enablers. We know that 70% of employees in the developed world are knowledge workers in some form or another. It is within the bounds of possibility for Africa to do the same by getting all the basics right in order to embark on an irreversible pursuit of knowledge-based economy. To this end, this ICT Indaba is a critical platform for us to consider, among others, the development of Africa's knowledge-based economy, creating conducive conditions for foreign direct investment in information and communication technologies, developing ICT infrastructure and growing the ICT industry as part of Africa's growth and development strategies. While we cannot downplay the role of primary traditional industries, we must remain aware that the biggest commodity in the world today is knowledge, and the ability to generate, access, and distribute knowledge have become key determinants for a higher developmental trajectory for any nation. In this case, we can learn a thing or two from the experience of South Korea, whose GDP per capita in 1960 was equal to that of Nigeria, Ghana, and Cameroon. However, within 30 years, South Korea has managed to propel itself to among the top 8 richest economies in the world by setting up a knowledge-based economy. The one thing we can be sure of is that setting up a knowledge society allows us to adapt to the changing conditions and design solutions that will enhance the competitiveness of our emerging nations. There is no doubt that ICT is the key to knowledge sharing and access to information. For this Indaba, of immediate concern should be, among others, the low rankings associated with African countries when studying most reputable global indicator systems which measure the extent of penetration of ICTs. If one considers the ICT Development Index released by the International Telecommunications Union, which focuses on ICT infrastructure, access, usage and uptake and capacity, no African country is in the top 50 of the 154 world countries which were measured. Mauritius is the highest ranked African country at position 69. The World Bank regularly releases the Knowledge Economy Index, which focuses on economic and institutional regime, educated and skilled people, innovation systems and information communication technologies, and on that measurement, Africa does not have a country in the top 100 either. With this in mind, we must try to find appropriate responses in areas such as The reliability of our policy environment and its ability to foster foreign direct investment confidence. B, the strength and credibility of our regulatory framework to facilitate cost reduction and ensure secure networks. C, the availability of appropriate skills to ensure that we acquire the critical mass of human capital to drive a robust, knowledge-based economy. And D, adequate funding to ensure universal access to broadband and ICT services. Improving Africa's information communication technologies is a precondition for improving its productive industrial capacity. Studies by the World Bank have also highlighted the positive impact that investment in broadband penetration can have on GDP growth. A 10% increase in broadband penetration generates an additional 1.4% increase in GDP growth for developing countries. A key challenge is therefore to increase broadband penetration so that we can realize the associated benefits for countries within Africa. We are required to accelerate investment in broadband infrastructure to achieve the higher growth in the information and communications technology. We believe that strategic investment in the ICT sector will allow Africa to increasingly play an important role in the development of new applications and technological innovations that are relevant for the needs of our continent, and that this will ensure a continued multiplier effect on economic growth. African countries can provide the innovators for future technological development in ICT that can in turn continue to drive economic and social development on the continent through developing innovations and applications relevant to the needs of the peoples. I am informed that this ICT Indaba will look at the impact of some of the policy and regulatory measures required to ensure that we move towards a knowledge-based economy. This necessarily calls for a particular focus on prerequisites for broadband development. As Africans, our task is to consider some of the international best practices in other emerging markets with respect to skills development, economic interventions, and the successful development of smart cities in developing countries, all of which have helped to reposition countries in terms of their economic development through the ICT sector. Similarly, we need a closer policy discussion and infrastructure development initiatives in Africa, while reviewing the alternatives to leapfrog to a higher development level by leveraging on smart technologies and policy. As we review the various options at hand, we also need to bring on board green technologies and entrepreneurs in this space to enhance this flourishing ICT industry and fostering a culture of eco-friendly innovation. In doing so, we could sample some of the innovations that would fast-track the growth of the continent while addressing the needs of entrepreneurs in terms of access to capital. We must also not forget that 55% of the Africans live in rural areas. As a result, it is our responsibility to ensure that they are integrated into the knowledge-based society. As such, we are encouraged and inspired by the example of 28-year-old Sahid Adepoju of Nigeria, who has, despite challenges in funding and entrepreneurial support, designed and manufactured the first African tablet PC, the AfriTab. Heeding this example, I hope that the deliberations at this conference will conclude with a comprehensive analysis of the lessons learned and will develop these into smart, strategic, measurable, attainable, result-oriented, time-bound initiatives and programs between this and the next ICT Indaba. Africa carries on its shoulders a historical burden next to none in the use and provision of technology. We therefore have to rise to the occasion and weigh in our salt's worth by becoming a strong player in the world of ICT's market. It all begins with you. The second African telecoms revolution starts today at this ICT Indaba. With these few words, I declare the ICT Indaba officially open and wish you fruitful deliberations throughout this conference. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Well, a very sweet and short speech by the Deputy President of South Africa, Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe, officially opening, but also handing or giving the audience that is here a message from the government of South Africa. Well, a few points there that he made, talking about the need for foreign investment in the information and community communication and technology sector, but also asking African countries to take a deep look at themselves and the things they are doing, and asking themselves whether what we are supposed to do as a continent actually is what we are thinking about at the moment. Well, let's go over inside to the Deputy Minister of Communications for some of the remarks that she is making.
To you to come and join me on podium just to say a few words to this congregation and the Deputy President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Minister. Excellency, Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Excellency, Honorable Minister of Communications, and Honorable Minister of Communications from Botswana. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's really our pleasure, at least it's my honor, to have our Vice President of the Republic of South Africa to join us this afternoon. And his vision, his guidance, and his encouragement give us a lot of aspirations. And I firmly believe that with African leaders like him, the Africa will further be developed. And the Vice President, I think that in the world today, still a lot of misperceptions of Africa. Consider Africa still left behind very far from the others. I just, if you allow me, give you just one example. In year 2000, when I was director of ITU Standardization Bureau, we nominated an expert for vice chairman of ITU, newly established group for mobile communications. One of the vice chairmen is coming from Africa. After we announced the nomination, some good friends from developed countries come to my office saying that you are crazy. How can you nominate someone from Africa who even doesn't know how to use internet? 1 month later, the chairman of the study group circulated the questionnaires to all his vice chairmen, altogether 12, and Africa is only one of the 12. He circulated the questionnaire to all his vice chairmen to ask how can we manage this study group. And he sent that questionnaire by email. I'm very pleased, very proud to tell you that the first one who answered this email consultation is coming from our Africa study group, vice study group chairman. You can see how misperceptions of the others. And look at the Africa continent. We noted that Africa now today enjoyed more than 57% mobile penetrations. So compared with the other continent, Africa is the most dynamic continent. Vice President, yesterday I made a statement that if Africa continues this way, someday Africa will bypass Asia Pacific. And I was not lucky yesterday that many journalists came after me, asked me to provide further proofs. They don't believe that, but I firmly believe that. So we have, they say that where is their will, there is a way. I think that here we don't have a will only, we have determinations. From top to the bottom, Africa have one voice, like to stand up, to become strong. I think we have such a strong commitment from our Africa national leaders, from Africa experts, from industries, from young people. I think that Africa will come up very, very rapidly. I appreciate very much the initiative from South Africa to organize this ICT Indaba, which provides us a very good opportunity to re-look at the situation in the whole Africa to see how can we come together to work even faster in the next future. So, Vice President, once more again, I really appreciate very much your presence to our event and to join us this afternoon. And once more again, I would like to again restate my confirmation and my statement that Africa will come up very, very rapidly. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I also do not want to take away your night shift benefits. I'm not sure if you know about those, but some of you know. Deputy President, ever since I got appointed as the Deputy Minister, I received these late night calls after 12 up to 4 a.m. And I ask, why can't you call me earlier than this? They tell me, no, Vodacom is giving us free airtime from 12 to 5 a.m. So I don't want to deprive some of you that are enjoying those benefits. I would therefore call upon the stage Honorable Minister, Mr. Molefe, to come and give us a vote of thanks. Minister.
Your Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe, Honorable Minister of Communications for South Africa, Pule, Honorable Ministers representing the many countries of Africa, Deputy Director General of ITU, Deputy Ministers, Your Excellencies, members of Diplomatic Corps, heads of delegations, captains of industry. I wonder when you will be promoted from being captains of industry to major generals and if no one extends to you a promotion, I think you have to claim it yourselves. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Your Excellency, thank you very much for that illuminating, motivating, and inspirational speech. On behalf of colleagues, ministers, and the delegations in attendance, sir, we are indebted to your attendance this afternoon. We are mindful of your busy schedule, and despite the busy schedule, you found time to be with us this afternoon. As a young politician, born and bred in Africa, the last few years that I've been an elected official, I've taken myself serious because the electorates have taken me seriously. And that has been my motivation, to at all times embrace the ideals espoused by those who voted for me. That confidence should be demonstrated by our capacity as elected leaders to transform our political manifestos into working and live documents, manifested in policies and programs which touch positively on the lives of the electorates. The ICT Indaba that we are gathered here to celebrate and participate in is a success in a number of ways. It has brought together policymakers, ICT experts, users, investors, and technologists. We have to find one another and create synergies which will give to our people tools and services and products which will improve their lives, their livelihoods, and create opportunity and growth and prosperity for all. Not just the urban elites, but to touch the lives of those in the rural areas. Our policies should not gather dust in our offices, but should be living documents which will yield tangible benefits to our people. True that Africa is predominantly rural. We have to weigh the investments, opportunities, and returns between social infrastructures of water, roads, healthcare services, and the provision of ICTs. Yesterday in my submission, Your Excellency, I indicated that for us to generate support and social acceptance of ICTs, we have to simplify the technologies, we have to simplify the content, thereby create appeal and acceptance. Your Excellency, for me and my colleagues, it is important for African heads of state and government to be drivers of ICT sector in ensuring that our own budgets at the national level set thresholds for purposes of expanding and growing access to ICTs by all. Yesterday, we were presented with young people who are innovators. They cannot rely only on the goodwill of private sector for their research and experiments to grow and be converted into tangible projects. Governments have to increase resources, our own resources, for research and development. And it is our belief and hope that as you interact with fellow heads of state and government, this will be brought to their attention and become part of the discussion of our agendas. Key to our success, Your Excellency, is on the efficiencies of our systems, such that transboundary business transactions can be relied upon and trusted and believed in. We have to develop frameworks, institutional capacities, and firm regulations which will assure neighboring countries that trans-border business is viable and opportune. And of course, as we develop these regulations, we should not stifle creativity, we should not stifle innovation and experimentation. At the same time, we should develop systems which will give confidence to all of us on the reliability, security of these systems. Yes, broadband offers great prospects and opportunities that should be harnessed. Your Excellency, it is true that we have to accelerate broadband infrastructure development. That again calls for our own commitment as developing countries. Not so long ago, I was a student of an executive program at Harvard. A number of lecturers who presented, scientists, are from this continent, who have migrated to developed economies, because resources here at home in Africa were not sufficiently provided to meet the aspirations of these scientists. We therefore have to create strong and robust institutions within the continent which will attract and retain these specialists. Mine is not a speech, but to express our sincere gratitude to yourself and to the government of South Africa for hosting this conference. And I believe that while we are here, we definitely will make contacts amongst ourselves and with the institutions that have attended in order to grow our own service provision in our countries. We are indebted to the hospitality of the South African government through your minister and her deputy for the facilitation that has been extended to us during our stay. This indeed, in my view, will be an educating, broadening, and an enriching experience and forum. I thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we can all rise, all of us to stand up, so that we allow the Deputy President with other dignitaries to go for the photo shoot. Can my protocol officers lead in that? Deputy President and your team, Minister, can you all go for the photo shoot? That will show you where.
It's the Deputy President and other ministers.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. Can I have all our ministers that are here, the ones that are visiting our country, and deputy ministers, the DSG of the ITU, to join the Deputy President also on the photo shoot?
The ICT, Information Communication Technology, Indaba is being held, the first for Africa, and that is why we hear government, ministers of African governments, bureaucrats from their respective governments, entrepreneurs in the information and communication technology space, entrepreneurs, scientists, everybody who is playing in this space is here, trying to see how or what Africa can do for itself to try and come up with the sort of programs, the sort of business ventures, the sort of infrastructure rollout that the continent needs if it is to move forward and take advantage of existing technologies in these areas to make sure that as many Africans as possible have access to the internet, that as many Africans as possible do get employment opportunities in this sector, and perhaps more importantly, how to ensure that this continent of ours is on par with other continents, the Americas of this world, in trying to create and actually take advantage of existing technology, develop new ones, and so that we can move forward and take care of our developmental needs, but also critical areas of our lives, things like health and education, because right now, these days, you can actually even conduct operations with experts placed elsewhere in the world as long as you are taking advantage of the technologies that are available. And this Indaba taking place, it started yesterday and it's going on until Thursday, is being held here to do exactly that. Well, joining us now is Rapelang Rabana, who is an entrepreneur in the ICT space. Welcome to the program, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for you.
So, why are you here? Let me start there.
I came on special invitation from the minister because of the entrepreneurial work we've been doing in the technology space. My company was started about 7 years ago, and we've always been about using technology to bring about inspiring change. And we developed voice over IP applications for mobile phones, essentially Skype-like things, but specifically for cell phones, way back when, about 7 years ago, and among the first in the world to release some. And since then, we've developed a number of products and continue to be quite innovative. And I think from there, the minister thought I'd be a good representative to come.
Okay, let's talk about it a little bit. What does it do? Because one of the biggest challenges facing ICT is just how expensive it is for ordinary people to actually take advantage of it. As a result, most of us are actually illiterate, so to speak, in that space.
It is a big task, and one of the things that government's role is obviously in providing infrastructure and the environment for entrepreneurs like ourselves to be able to build applications that will ultimately reach the end person and make significant change. And that's quite a long process. I think the ICT Indaba and what the minister's done here is excellent, because it's bringing together all those stakeholders, and entrepreneurs like ourselves, private sector and government, can actually begin to have those conversations as to what everyone can play and how each one can add value to this ecosystem.
Your product, what is it called?
It's Yego Communications. The product is Yego, the mobile application.
And what does it do?
And it was essentially enabling calls using 3G or your Wi-Fi connection, using voice over IP protocols to make calls. We've also developed a product called Office Connection, which is a business telephone system and allows entrepreneurs without any infrastructure to be able to set up a professional telephone system and run like a proper company, essentially.
In other words, I can work from home and basically have all this infrastructure and pretend that I have a big office somewhere and I need to be taken seriously.
That's exactly what we designed it for. When we first moved into our first office, we found that we had no telephone system, and it was incredibly expensive, 30 or 50,000 rands to get a PBX system, as you would call it. And we designed this specifically for us in mind. It's a website where you can register, you get a business number, a fax number, and you can add extensions and people and transfer calls even if you're all working in different places. And it works as if it's a normal telephone system, but links people who are in different locations and is as good as any top brand at the moment.
Now, how cheap is it to make a call overseas using your system as opposed to one using, our fixed line operators, for example?
It's significantly cheaper. For local calls, you're looking at about a 30 to 40% saving. For our local rates, for example, to mobile numbers are 90 cents a minute, whereas your Vodacom or your Telkom contract, you're looking at over R1 a minute at least. And international calls, you're looking at a saving about up to 50%. But the biggest saving is ultimately for you to call between extensions when you're in different locations. In the olden days, if you are in different branches in Johannesburg and Cape Town, you would be charging to call each other. And now you can all be on one system and actually not call to speak to people inside your own company, and that's the biggest saving.
But then how expensive is it to actually get the system itself? Because it may well be cheaper to make the calls, but is it cheap to get the instrument?
The instrument itself is much, much cheaper. Once you have an internet connection, whether it's 3G or ADSL, access to our service starts at 350 rands a month for a 5-person office. So you're getting access to a PBX system that is worth hundreds of thousands of rands for 350 rands a month and accessing all the features. And from there, you're able to make calls. So it's really about making it accessible to the entrepreneur, the one-man show who needs to run as professionally as possible.
Now let's talk about your other projects. You keen to play in this space. You keen, for example, to bring on board the UN World Youth Summit Awards here to South Africa. It's an annual event. It's under the auspices of the United Nations, but you want to bring it here to South Africa. Tell us about that.
I've been involved as an ambassador and a juror of the United World Summit Youth Awards for a few years now, and it's largely been dominated by North Africa, Middle East and Europe, and it's something that in Sub-Saharan Africa we haven't really been a part of. And the chairperson, Professor Peter Brook, and I have been quite keen and speaking with the minister to bring it to South Africa next year. And it's really about making sure that young people who are using ICT or technology in any way to solve key social problems, whether it's health or education or any of the Millennium Development Goals, actually get recognition, get support and get networked into the community that can encourage them to further their efforts.
Do you have to bid for it?
No. It is a competition. So you will apply, and a selection of a jury panel will judge the hundreds of applications and see who ranks the top 3, basically in about 10 categories, in environment, in education, and healthcare, in empowerment of women, and various categories like that.
Well, here's the opportunity to talk to South Africans if you need some form of assistance. What is it that other people can do to help you win your bid, so to speak, or the competition?
Great. Well, definitely need some sponsors. So we're speaking with the government and some private parties to actually help us sponsor the event and be able to bring in the young people and the jurors to actually assess the event. In general exposure. So from the media like yourself, be able to actually tell and reach young people in schools and universities that there is this platform for them to come and shine.
Well, I mean, your views just generally on young people's uptake of technology. Are we as savvy as we should be? Are we keen to embrace technology as we should be doing?
We haven't done it enough, and it's something as a continent and as a country we have to look much more carefully at. And the internet has a huge impact as an empowerment and as an enablement tool, and we've got to use it not just for what we've seen in the Arab Spring in a political environment to overthrow abusive governments. It is also crucial for economic and social empowerment and delivery of key services in education and healthcare. So it's something we have to take in as a tool that is actually going to help us deliver services that can reach millions and billions of people, and not just localized solutions. I always say that there's a parable that says that when you teach a man to fish, you actually encourage him to enable him to feed himself for a lifetime. But I would rather say that if you expose a man to the internet, he can actually change his life. And that's the real power of technology. What we saw about 100 years ago was that when people learned to read and write, and the people who could read and write were the best positioned to influence what happened in the world. And now that we're using mobile phones and computers and laptops and tablets all the time, the ability to understand technology and be able to translate machine-to-machine communication is going to be that distinguishing factor that separates those who can influence how the world works. We've seen what Mark Zuckerberg has done with Facebook, and that's really just a stepping stone of what can be done there. So the imperative of technology can't be understated.
But what, in your view, is making it difficult? In other words, what are the stumbling blocks?
The stumbling blocks. Definitely our education system. You do need your maths and science to do well in technology at all. So until we actually restore our maths and science skills in schools, we reduce the number of people that can potentially enter the technology space. Secondly, from that, there's a government ecosystem that needs to be supportive and cultivate an environment that values intellectual property more than traditional, not necessarily more, but as well as traditional businesses, whether it's in manufacturing and the like, and actually create incentives for venture capitalists or angel investors that focus primarily on the tech space. We've seen this happen in countries like Israel, where they've created communities that have provided great incentives for angel investors or funders to come in and fund young companies and intellectual property-based businesses. The second thing would really be about making sure that we get young people out of universities to consider entrepreneurship as a legitimate option afterwards, and not believe that a corporate job is the only way forward.
But then those are long-term, if you like, interventions that are going to take quite some time to actually implement. In the meantime, are there things, sort of low-hanging fruit, if you like, that we can do as a country to try and sort of narrow the gap?
The low-hanging fruit, I believe, is this platform like the World Summit Awards, where we're specifically going around and finding people who are already doing things, putting them on a platform and saying to South Africa, let's have a look at what these young people are doing and let's replicate this in higher scale and in greater quantities. That's really the big gap that we can try and close now. Let's promote it, let's encourage competition, let's require young people to start getting involved now with whatever skills they have.
Thank you very much, Rapelang Rabana, an entrepreneur in the ICT space. Well, if you've just joined us, you're watching a live broadcast. We're coming to you from the International Convention Center in Cape Town. The ICT Indaba, Information and Communication Technology Indaba, is being held here in Cape Town, South Africa, for the first time. Well, joining me now is Benjamin Mutlapane, someone who works for Business Connection, someone who's been in this sector for a very long time. I was just telling someone now that back in the years, more than 10 years ago, you were the youngest South African entrepreneurs who were involved in this space. Well, right now you've grown quite a lot and become a lot. Tell us about your experiences over the past 10 or so years that you've been part of this sector.
No, thank you very much. It's almost 16 years, in fact, since I've been associated with Business Connection, my twin brother and I. For us as a country and as a continent, we made a lot of development, but we still believe that the digital revolution has to happen on the African continent. Everybody's looking at Africa as the next emerging market and the last frontier. But I think it's still the last frontier in terms of technology, in terms of liberalization of our telecoms, and more importantly, in terms of making sure that our people have got access to internet, to broadband, and all the things that can improve their lives as well.
Now, for you, as people who are deeply involved, you put your money there, you put your lives in it until you found partners and grew a bit bigger than you were, obviously, when you started. What for you were the biggest obstacles, especially as black entrepreneurs?
I think the biggest obstacle has always been lack of funding, but also I think a self-belief among ourselves as black South Africans. I think the first form of any belief, you've got to be believed by your people. And I remember the days when we were starting up and meeting people in the street to say, we don't believe that there are black people in IT. And I think it's important to encourage as many of our people to enter the ITC and IT sector and make sure that they're successful. And that, I think, are possibly lack of finance and a self-belief are possibly the two obstacles.
Given where we are now as a country and as a continent, what for you, if you were to have an opportunity to tell someone who can do something about it, what would you tell them? What are the three most important things you would ask them to do for our country and for our continent, especially for young people?
I think the important part I'll encourage is governments to liberalize the telecommunications. Make sure that you can allow as much liberalization to happen, because with liberalization comes innovation, and innovation brings entrepreneurship as well. And secondly, if you're a young person out there, focus on maths and science. Still crucial today and will always be crucial going forward. And also, the third thing I'll say, don't be afraid to try new things, change careers, but more importantly, enter the ICT sector. It's exciting as well.
Well, a lot of people seem to think that ICT is for nerds, for strange-looking people who are very clever, and it's got nothing to do with them. In other words, ordinary people who think they are ordinary people and not as clever as some of you think that it's actually not for them. Is that?
Well, 16, 20 years ago, you had to put glasses on to be in the industry. But today, it's very much a cool industry, very much led by young people who are basically exposed to social media, to the Twitter, to the Facebook. So I think that perception has changed. And also has become a way of communication. A lot of the tablets that exist out there make communication much easier. I recall the time when emails was for a few people who could use emails. Now it's almost unheard of if in business you don't have an email address, you don't have a website. It's becoming very much part of what we do on a day-to-day lives.
Benjamin, thank you very much for talking to us, and all the best with your business. Benjamin Motlanthe, who is from Business Connection, two twins who actually started 16 years ago. They built their business from scratch, and over the years managed to get funding, but also got a solid partnership, and today they are part of Business Connection. Joining me now is Nidhi Tendon, who is an economist from North Africa but currently based in Canada. Nidhi, thanks very much for joining us. Now, you've been working with women in ICT for quite some time. What for you are the challenges that women in ICT are facing at the moment?
Their needs and interests in applying ICT hardware and software applications in their general livelihood priorities are not recognized at all. People still think, a woman farmer wants to use a computer? No, it's not true.
So the sort of traditional stereotypes, if you like.
Very much so. And women actually are very practical. They want to know how they can use these tools. They've been looking since, the tools first came out 20 years ago or so. They've been in the vanguard of looking at how to use these tools.
But how demanding are they? In other words, how proactive are women in terms of saying, look, we need these tools for our survival. We need these tools to do the work that we're supposed to be doing.
They're very practical oriented. They know that big finance always comes behind infrastructure. So it's always about the newest gadget, the broadband infrastructure. Nobody's really concerned about the educational component and the applied learning. And so women, and this is where women, fall out. They don't get that learning. They have to find ways to get that learning. Community centers have been built in certain parts of the world, Caribbean, here in Africa, and women need to have the courage to go to these community centers and use what's there. I think when one woman does it, other women follow. So it's looking for that one woman.
But isn't what you're talking about a problem that is an ICT problem general? In other words, our communities look at ICT as something that is out there, as something that's for clever or very special people to sort of take up, but they are not relating it to their daily lives. In other words, the challenges you're talking about that affect women are essentially the challenges that affect everybody, in fact, including men.
Yes, no, that's true. I think what it is, though, is that women themselves may think, I'm not going to pursue an ICT career per se, because that's something very specialized, not realizing, in fact, that all the work we do, whether it's in the education sphere, health, finance, tourism, anything actually that we do, is underpinned by ICT more and more. So the de facto situation is a woman who will say, well, I'm not scientifically bent. She's de facto working with ICTs already. Now the question is, does she ensure that she gets trained as she proceeds with her work so that she keeps in touch with, software?
And what for you are the stuff? Let's say there's a woman who says, I actually need it. She's very much aware and actually keen to take up ICT. What then become the challenges in her path towards achieving what she wants to achieve?
Societal challenges primarily are the one. I think people feel that women are not interested in the sector. But two, that the investment tends to go to hard, tangible things and not to the soft human capital side of things, which is where women are wanting those kinds of resources. I tried to raise funds for training women farmers. There was a time 15 years ago when you could raise funds. Now it's almost impossible. Of course, we are in recession times, right? But it's almost impossible to find funding for human capital development.
Why is that?
Because money is scarce. They're looking for return on investments, and return on investments is always related to something tangible like infrastructure. Grant money on infrastructure, you're going to get that money back somehow. Pay a woman to learn about how to be more effective in the business space, you may or may not get the return on investment. And that's actually a false premise, because economies depend on human capital, on social capital.
Now, there are women who've overcome the hurdles, so to speak. They've managed to secure some funding, they've managed to get really good jobs in ICT. Do they have particularly unique challenges up there as well?
Yes, we completed a report for the International Telecommunications Union. It's actually called A Bright Future in ICTs, and it was tracing those women who landed in the end in management positions, and they found that the 24/7 nature of the particular jobs that they were in, which were high-level sort of software service type, undercut their own priorities, which were about the family and the household. And so they determined, I don't want to do this anymore. So that was a choice. And companies are now beginning to realize, like Microsoft and Google, that you cannot expect that kind of pressure, male or female, that life balance is about balancing work and home, and that the home is really important. So,
thank you very much for talking to us.
You're very welcome.
Well, that was Nidi Tendon, an economist from East Africa, but currently based in Canada. Well, with me now is another guest. His name is Abdul Karim Somaila, who is the Secretary General of the African Telecommunications Union. Thank you very much for joining us.
It's me for thank you to give me this opportunity.
Now, From the African Telecommunications Union's perspective, what are the remaining hurdles that are standing in the way of Africa taking advantage of available technologies to build the backbone of the kind of ICT infrastructure that we need as a continent to move forward?
I think what for African Telecommunication Union, for us, the first thing is just to be sure that all the African village, instead of the city, instead of capital, we were really interconnected. So this is our objective and this is our goals.
Now, where to from here? What are you going to tell this conference when you get the opportunity to speak? Is it that we need to do as a continent?
Yes, here as what we need to do as continent, we have two big issues now. The first issue we have is what we know, all you are aware, that digital migration. So for us, it's a very important issue, and we plan to see whether by 2015 we're going to switch up analog television broadcasting.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us, and all the best in your deliberations.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we had time for. Thank you very much for being part of this broadcast. From me, Vuya Mvoko, and the rest of the crew, good afternoon.